Section 2 of Chapter 12 here. We're going to be covering the Second War for Independence all the way through slavery and sectional balance. We just got done with the War of 1812, in which really it's a draw between the United States and Britain. Because the United States won the last battle of New Orleans, even though it occurred after the Treaty of Ghent, it really was seen as a victory for America, and they were very proud of what's going on. And it ushers in a different era in America, a one-party system, which was the only time in our history that, well, not counting Washington's presidency when there weren't parties yet, but the only time in our history we've had a one-party system. The War of 1812, which is not a very well-named war since it happened in 1812, 1813, 1814, and even a little bit in 1815, sometimes, including here in the American pageant, was called the Second War for American Independence. It showed the other nations of the world that America would defend its beliefs, that this wasn't just a flash in the pan thing that was going on with the United States, that this country was going to be here for a little while and at least stand up for what was going on. It was very small compared to Europe in terms of the size of our country, but there was a lot of potential there. The war, was quite small. Napoleon had invaded Russia with 500,000, some people even say 600,000 men in his grand army. This war, we invaded Canada with 5,000. So it's a very small scale war, almost skirmishes on the frontier compared to what's going on in Europe. America did earn some respect from the world, though. Maybe we're not going to get picked on as much anymore. Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison emerged as heroes. Old Hickory and Old Tippecanoe. I guess all these generals are just old. I'm old. I defeated Native Americans and the British. I'm old. Yeah. American industry was born on the necessity from the blockade and also the Foolish Embargo Act. And so basically to produce goods, the American factories started to roll out in New England to start. Canadians also felt like they won. They beat the United States. They prevented us from taking over their country, but at the same time, they wanted more protection from the British in case America got a wild hair up their nose and decided, let's invade Canada again. South Park, maybe they'll do that. I don't know. Oh, wait, that's a movie. The Rush-Bagot Agreement was made between the United States and Britain in 1817, which limited naval armament of the Great Lakes. Eventually, they get rid of, warships on the Great Lakes at all. Noah Webster, in 1828, published his American Dictionary of the English Language, which is significant because many linguists and historians think that it was the second Declaration of Independence. Webster's dictionary was a signal that we spoke American or American English, and they spoke English. And he purposely spelled words differently. That's why in Britain color has a U, and in America we don't have a U. It's strange. In Britain they spell civilization with an S. That's instead of the Z, not to start the word. And here's a list of British and American English words that are different. We have cookies, they have biscuits. We have cotton candy, they have candy floss, chips, crisps, you name it. French fries, chips. I remember as a child being very confused. I'd like to have fish and chips, but I wanted French fries, not chips. But they actually came with French fries. You can take a look at that, and if you've ever spoke British English, it's very, very different. Me and my mate were hanging out on the flat, and I got to tell him on my mobile. I was watching the telly. We went down in the tube. We went to the pub, and we got righteous pissed, and we woke up in the morning and had bangers and mash. That makes perfect sense in Britain. And you Americans probably going, what? So anyway, that's what's going on. Nationalism. The most impressive byproduct of the War of 1812 was a heightened sense of the pride in America. Not being proud of being Virginian or a New Yorker or Massachusetts, whatever those are called. It was, hey, I'm an American. I'm a part of this new country. American literature emerged for the first time. You're getting your own style, not just copying of European styles. You have Washington Irving, who wrote the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. You have James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote The Last of the Mohicans. North African pirates were defeated, the Algerians, in 1815, and so America was off to a nice win streak at that point. The Army and the Navy were expanded, and the Bank of the United States was revived by Congress in 1816. And so America, really filled with pride, began to grow. It's like the shackles were off, they were done just kind of, I guess, feeling their way out as a country. We're respected, we're forging ahead with our own style. So here's "We owe allegiance to no crown," and there's our American flag, kind of showing how proud we are to be Americans. Here's the rebuilt Washington, D.C. They rebuilt the presidential mansion, painted it white. Theodore Roosevelt called it the White House, which is what we know the presidential mansion as now. Congress, in 1816, instituted the first protective tariff to protect us from British goods. This burgeoning American factory system needed help. The British could make cloth for $4 a roll. We made it for $4 a roll as well. Maybe the British stuff was made a little better, but you put a 25% tariff on it. If somebody buys British cloth, the government makes $1. If they buy American cloth, great, the money stays here. We have American jobs and American factories grow. This was protection for American companies. It did mean higher costs for the consumers. British companies tried to get rid of American competition by slashing their prices. They thought if they could have a bargain basement sale and sell everything at low prices, they could put the United States' factories out of business. And so these tariffs were necessary to basically prop up the American factories until we could catch up to the British. The tariff placed a 20 to 25% tax on the value of dutiable imports. And protectionism became a very strong facet of the American economy in America after this. It lasts for the rest of the century virtually, all the way into the 1900s in the progressive era. Almost for 100 years does America believe in protectionism and having tariffs to protect our industry so people would buy American. It's funny how things have changed. So Henry Clay, the great congressman from Kentucky, created a plan to develop America, the economy. It's called the American system, and it had three main parts. It was going to help a little bit of everybody. First, they're going to have a strong banking system and provide easy and abundant credit. Basically, the national bank is strengthened. You're going to have loans available so people can take out money and invest it and grow the economy. That was a hard thing that was for America, was having a lot of hard cash was difficult early in our history. Second, a protective tariff that would allow Eastern manufacturing to flourish. So the government can also make money on these tariffs and allow manufacturing to flourish. And then with that money, they're going to build a network of roads and canals that would transport raw materials across the country. Basically, he saw the western frontier as kind of the colonies of the East. The Eastern factories could get goods from the West. They could also sell their goods in those markets in the West. The tariffs would protect those. The banks would lend out money to the factories. The banks would also lend out money to build these roads and canals, and it would transport goods and people and services much, much easier. And basically, everyone gets a little bit of something, except the South. The South kind of left out on this. The tariff helps the North. The banking helps the North. The canals and roads would help the South a little bit. This is mainly for the West. President Madison vetoed a bill to give the states aid for infrastructure, deeming it unconstitutional. Remember, he was a strict constitutionalist, kind of like Jefferson. And unless you got a really good real estate deal, you got to follow the letter of the Constitution to a T, which is a bunch in the word Constitution. The Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans were opposed to using federal money to support interstate improvements. They saw that as a task of the states. And so even though Henry Clay proposed this big American system, he was blocked by the presidents and many people in the Democratic Republican Party, which they're all in the Republican Party because the Federalists were dead after the Hartford Convention. New England opposed internal improvements too. It was a waste of money. They didn't know why you'd spend it on these bumpkin hillbillies out in the woods. And the South didn't get anything out of it either. And so Henry Clay, really kind of spun his wheels in the mud trying to get this American system off the ground. Oops, sorry, it didn't all come out at once. There were some other improvements. You have the Erie Canal, which was commissioned in New York, which really greatly improved. It basically connected the Great Lakes to New York City via the Hudson River. Some companies built toll roads or turnpikes. They even built corduroy roads, which corduroy is French for cloth of the king. They cut down trees and lay them horizontally like this picture. And it doesn't wash out in the mud or get all dusty, but it's got to be a tremendously rough ride. One big success in 1818, the National Road opened after 12 years of delays. Basically getting through the Appalachians, it made it much easier to traverse the Appalachian Mountains, which is kind of comical because compared to the Rocky Mountains where we in Colorado lived, The Appalachians are little hills. But back then it was tough. Technology wasn't great. The transportation wasn't great. And that national road was really, really important. Eventually, it was extended all the way to Illinois in 1838. The Erie Canal, which was paid for with state funds, was 363 miles worth of canals with locks, which are just giant bathtubs. You put your boat in, and you got to get it up to another level, and you fill it with water. And your little boat or your rubber ducky goes up, and then you move forward, and then you close the lock, and then you can move it up. And then when you want the boat to go down, you just drain the water. It's really simple. The Erie Canal opened on October 26, 1825. However, they didn't think ahead. They didn't plan to have steamboats. The steamboats would churn, and probably it was not wide enough, and it would take out the banks. Eventually, they expanded the Erie Canal for steamboats, and this touches off a canal building boom. By 1850, just 25 years later, there are 3,600 miles worth of canals, which really kind of connected the Northwest Territories to the East Coast. The problem is most of those went east to west and not north to south. So you can see some of the major roads, the canals, the railroads. We haven't even talked about the choo-choo trains yet. They're just being invented at that time, kind of in Baltimore. But the country is getting closer and closer together. There's a network of transportation that is binding the western frontier, which that's the west to them, to the eastern manufacturers. This is a little video on James Madison. It's a PBS series, 1 minute videos. They're really good if you want to look them up on that other YouTube channel. Students in class, you'll get to see that. So the era of good feelings. Oh, it's happy times. The Federalists ran a presidential candidate for the last time in 1816, and James Monroe won the election. He was the Secretary of State to James Madison, the guy that negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. His presidency was called the era of good feelings because two political parties were getting along. Really, there's just one. The Federalists are pretty much dead. He toured the nation to warm welcomes and cheers, and people loved the president. It was just a happy time in American history. In 1820, he won every electoral vote, but won in 1820. He was virtually unopposed. I believe the one vote was in New England. It went to John Quincy Adams. He was the only president to be reelected after an economic panic. There's a huge economic downturn in 1819, but because there's no opposition to the Democratic Republicans, he kind of runs unopposed. And usually that's a huge signal whether or not there's going to be a change in party of the presidency or not. You can look at any of the elections except for this one, that the president, the party in power, if the economy is strong, they usually stay in power. If the economy is poor, there's a panic, a depression, a recession, the country wants change. So use that as a guideline in predicting all the upcoming elections. So here's the electoral map of 1816. The Federalists really didn't exist anymore. They ran a guy named King. And then in 1820, that's kind of a landslide. It looks like Vermont, or that's New Hampshire, excuse me, gave a vote to an independent Republican, John Quincy Adams. Here's a picture of the era of good feelings. It's the Fairview Inn or 3 Mile House in near Baltimore. So the panic in 1819 was the first financial panic since Washington took office. Things look to be going well, but what happens in American history is because of capitalism, we have this boom and bust cycle. It's like a roller coaster. It goes up and then it goes down. And every 20 years or so, there's a bust. There's a panic. And it seems to get worse and worse over time, culminating with 1929 with the Great Depression. The main cause was over speculation of frontier lands. People bought up too many lands in the West, and they're trying to sell them for high prices. And it kind of led to, a crisis. The Bank of the United States was hated by Western farmers because it was foreclosed on many farms. People couldn't pay back their loans. They couldn't pay back their mortgage. And so without payments, the banks seized their assets. And so they blamed the banks because they simply, land values plummeted and they couldn't make the payments because they bought when it was too expensive. They needed to make money from the lost capital from speculation. So it's just kind of a downward spiral. The lower classes suffered greatly, paving the way for Jacksonian democracy. The poor people were really desperate. They kind of slide a little bit in terms of their purchasing power. And so they look for someone to be a voice for the common man. And eventually that will be Andrew Jackson. In the West, we have some growing pains going on. Between 1791 and 1819, 9 states from the West had joined the United States. This is the gradual shift in population in our nation. Most were admitted free or slave alternatively. They went back and forth, back and forth. People moved to the West because there's cheap land. There was building highways. There's jobs. The Indian territories had been eliminated. They had moved further and further west because they had defeated them in war, especially after the Battle of Tippecanoe and the Battle of Thames, when Tecumseh's Confederacy was defeated. Europeans flooded to the west for land. Europe was starved for land because it was owned by, the rich, wealthy 1%, whatever you want to call them. America had so much land, it was cheap, and they could come here and start a farm and have their own piece of property. Soil exhaustion in tobacco areas like Virginia and North Carolina forced people to move west as well. They didn't understand that if you grow tobacco every year, it depletes the soil of nutrients. Sometimes you need to, grow something else like soybeans to replenish nutrients to the soil. It was just easier back then to just give up on your farm, move further west, find a new place, start over, and grow tobacco again till it's depleted and then move on. The Land Act of 1820 authorized a buyer to purchase 80 virgin acres at a minimum of $1.25 an acre. Those prices were extremely low, unheard of in Europe, and it made it very easy for most people to buy land and start their own homestead, or not homestead, but property. The West also demanded cheap transportation. They also wanted cheap money. They wanted loans so they could buy more land. They wanted stuff to be able to get out there. People that travel to the West easier would make life a lot better in the West if they were connected. The West felt disconnected because they weren't tied into the East. It was hard to get manufactured goods. It was hard to get communications, and it was hard to personally travel back and forth. Finally, sectionalism grew between the North and the South over who controlled the West. Both tried to make the West in their own image. The North after them with manufacturing and industry and banking. The South on agriculture and plantations. Missouri asked for admission in 1819, and they were a slave state. The House of Representatives passed the Talmadge Amendment, making it more difficult for Missouri to become a state. At that point, there was a balance of slave states and free states. Adding Missouri would give more power to the slave states, and this is becoming a growing issue. It did not allow for any more slaves to be brought into Missouri, and it also called for the gradual emancipation of children born to slave parents already in Missouri. The amendment was defeated by the slave states in the Senate. It never passed, but it just kind of showed this growing controversy between the North and the South over the issue of slavery. The Senate held the growing power of the North in check for the Southerners. The peculiar institution, which is an expression to describe slavery, had economic impacts in the South. Slavery was actually dying out. It was just kind of a luxury of the rich until Eli Whitney, he's a northerner, watching some slaves pick cotton, decided to go back home and invent this machine, this engine or gin, that could mechanically pick the seeds out of cotton. And basically what the cotton gin did after 1793 is it made cotton profitable, and it basically made where plantations could grow cotton, make a profit. They could de-seed it at a much, much higher volume, but it also meant that they needed a lot more labor. Because slave trade was banned out of the United States, outside of the United States after 1808, the slaves in America, demand was higher, supply was limited, and so the price of slaves went up. They became more valuable, they became symbols of wealth, and you could make money with cotton, but you needed lots of labor, and so slavery became more institutionalized, more ingrained in the South, and it exploded as cotton production exploded as well. And so we're going to stop there for today. We're going to talk about the Missouri Compromise next time. If you have any questions or comments, put it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this.